I documented something so psychologically disturbing that I kept the complete findings locked away for decades. Something so unsettling about human transformation that it challenged everything I thought I knew about empathy, strength, and the hidden architecture of the human psyche. Have you ever noticed how the kindest people seem to carry the heaviest burdens? How they apologize for existing while absorbing everyone else's pain? How they give endlessly to people who take without conscience? If you have ever felt that people underestimate your awareness, that they see your gentleness and assume it means weakness, you need to hear what I discovered, because what I found was not weakness at all. It was something far more complex and infinitely more terrifying. I spent over 3 decades at my Zurich clinic studying patients who arrived broken and defeated, carrying wounds they could not even name. But these were not ordinary cases of depression or anxiety. These were empaths, individuals who had become what I termed emotional shock absorbers for everyone around them. They came with bruises they explained away, chronic exhaustion they blamed on themselves, and a universal tendency to apologize for taking up space. I expected to find scattered minds damaged by abuse. Instead, I discovered something that made my hands shake as I wrote my clinical notes. These empaths had not been broken by their experiences. They had been studying them. I found that every empath in my practice kept detailed mental records of everyone who had ever hurt them, not with bitterness, but with surgical precision. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears. They had mapped emotional patterns with the accuracy of trained psychologists. They understood manipulation tactics better than the manipulators themselves. They had never used this knowledge, not once, until something pushed them past their breaking point. I realized I was not treating victims. I was sitting across from what I would later call psychological geniuses in hiding. Their gift was not just feeling deeply, it was processing emotional information faster and more accurately than almost anyone else. Their brains were wired for pattern recognition in human behavior. What I discovered next shocked me even more. These empaths possessed what I termed emotional omniscience. They could read micro-expressions, detect vocal inconsistencies, and sense energy shifts that most people could not consciously perceive. They were living lie detectors who had been gaslit into believing their perceptions were wrong. I documented case after case where empaths had accurately predicted betrayals months before they happened, had sensed affairs before finding evidence, had identified manipulative behavior patterns that took me weeks of professional analysis to recognize. Their intuitive accuracy was not mystical, it was neurological sophistication operating at levels that challenged my understanding of human perception. To test this theory, I brought colleagues into sessions without telling my empath patients anything about them. Within minutes, these individuals could identify childhood traumas, relationship patterns, and professional insecurities. Their accuracy rate consistently exceeded 95%. My blood ran cold when I realized the truth. These empaths were not psychic. They were simply paying attention at a level most humans never reach. What others dismissed as intuition, they understood as advanced data collection. But here is what made my hands tremble as I wrote my notes. These empaths had been systematically trained to distrust their own perceptions by the very people who feared their accuracy. Every narcissist, every manipulator, every energy vampire in their lives had worked overtime to convince these empaths that their gift was a curse. I began to understand something revolutionary about gaslighting. It is not random cruelty. It is a survival mechanism used by psychologically primitive people to neutralize those who can see through their deceptions. The empath's accuracy threatened the manipulator's carefully constructed false reality. Society had taught these individuals that their gift was a curse. Every time they tried to voice what they saw, the lies, the manipulation, the hidden agendas, people called them too sensitive or overly emotional. They learned to silence themselves, to doubt their perceptions, to apologize for seeing what others could not or would not see. But here is what I discovered that changed everything. Truth does not disappear just because you stop speaking it. It accumulates. And in these cases, it had been accumulating for decades. I observed that empaths do not lose their minds from feeling too much. They lose their minds from being told their feelings are wrong. I realized these patients were not having nervous breakdowns. They were having breakthroughs. My breakthrough came when I started documenting what I called empathic accuracy logs. I had my patients write down their intuitive impressions about people and situations, then track the outcomes over time. The results were staggering. These empaths were right about people's hidden motivations, secret behaviors, and true intentions over 90% of the time. Yet they had been convinced they were too sensitive, paranoid, or imagining things. I realized I was witnessing a systematic campaign of psychological warfare designed to silence the most perceptive members of society. I identified a consistent pattern across dozens of cases. The transformation did not happen gradually. It exploded in one crystalline moment that reflected what I understood about shadow integration under extreme psychological pressure. The trigger was always betrayal. Not just any betrayal, but betrayal by someone the empath had completely trusted and protected. In case after case, I documented the same devastating scenario. The empaths would discover infidelity, financial betrayal, or systematic emotional manipulation from their closest person. What made it soul-crushing was not the act itself. It was the realization that they had seen the signs all along and ignored them. They had betrayed their own intuition to maintain the illusion of love. These patients did what empaths always do. They said nothing. They absorbed the pain in silence. They blamed themselves. They tried harder to be perfect partners, children, and friends. Then came what I termed the clarity event, the moment when their pattern recognition finally overwhelmed their need to believe the best in people. Most people expected empaths to cry, to scream, to fall apart emotionally. Their abusers certainly expected that. They were prepared for emotional chaos, ready with their usual arsenal of gaslighting and guilt manipulation. What happened instead terrified everyone involved. The empaths became unnaturally calm. I documented this as the moment when someone finally integrates their analytical capabilities with their emotional intelligence. But what I observed next challenged everything I thought I knew about human psychology. These empaths did not just speak truth, they became living truth. Their entire presence shifted into what I called integrated authenticity. They stopped performing, stopped people pleasing, stopped apologizing for existing. They became immovable forces of clarity. I watched as these individuals developed what I termed psychological sovereignty, complete ownership of their emotional and mental reality. They no longer sought external validation because they had achieved internal completion. This was not narcissism. It was self-actualization at its highest level. These empaths did not attack. They did not rage. They did not seek dramatic revenge. They simply began to speak truth. They revealed everything they had observed, catalogued, and silently endured. Not with cruelty, but with clinical precision, like surgeons identifying each diseased organ before removing it. This was not revenge, it was clarity. These empaths were finally using their gift of complete perception, not to excuse behavior, but to expose it. I realized this pattern was not about retaliation. This was shadow integration in real time, the moment when someone stops denying the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. The empath's shadow was not evil. It was their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength. When they finally integrated these aspects of themselves, they became what I called psychologically complete. Here is what made these cases so disturbing. The transformation was permanent. These patients did not cycle back into people pleasing. They did not apologize for their newfound boundaries. They did not second guess their perceptions anymore. They had become what I feared most, empaths who could no longer be manipulated. I developed what I called the integration observation protocol, documenting three distinct phases every transformed empath experienced. The recognition stage was first. Empaths learn to identify their suppressed shadow aspects, not just their anger, but their intelligence, their strength, and their absolute right to boundaries. They stopped pathologizing their perceptions and started trusting their emotional intelligence as the sophisticated data processing system it actually was. The integration stage proved more intense. I watched empaths merge their light and shadow aspects into what I termed the complete self. They became people who could be incredibly kind to those who deserved it and ruthlessly precise with those who did not. The application stage was what I found most fascinating. Integrated empaths learn to use their emotional intelligence strategically, not just defensively. They became what I described as psychological architects, people who could read, influence, and navigate human systems with supernatural precision. I realized these transformed empaths could no longer be victimized because they saw manipulation coming from miles away and neutralized it before it could take root. They did not just heal themselves, they became immune to psychological abuse while maintaining their capacity for genuine love and connection. What fascinated me most was how these empaths developed what I called emotional aikido, the ability to redirect negative energy without absorbing it. When confronted with manipulation, they would remain centered and redirect the energy back to its source with surgical precision. I documented a particularly striking example involving a patient I called Sarah M. After her integration, Sarah's narcissistic mother attempted her usual guilt manipulation during a family gathering. Instead of absorbing the toxic energy as she had for decades, Sarah calmly said, "I can see you are in pain, and I choose not to participate in this dynamic." Then she simply walked away. Her mother was left stunned, realizing that her primary emotional supply source had become unavailable. For the first time in their relationship, the mother was forced to confront her own behavior without Sarah absorbing and deflecting the consequences. I noted that Sarah had not become cold or vindictive. She had developed what I called compassionate detachment, the ability to love someone while refusing to enable their dysfunction. This represented a level of psychological maturity that most people never achieve. But I observed something even more profound. These empaths began attracting entirely different types of people into their lives. Their new energy signature, what I called integrated authenticity, repelled energy vampires while magnetizing psychologically healthy individuals. I wrote extensively about what I termed the frequency shift, when empaths stop operating from wounds and start operating from wisdom. They literally vibrate at a different psychological frequency. People who are still unconscious cannot maintain relationships with them anymore. I documented how one patient experienced this phenomenon after integration. Within 6 months, his circle of friends had completely changed. Toxic colleagues found excuses to avoid him while he began attracting psychologically healthy individuals. I realized I was witnessing natural selection at the consciousness level. Integrated empaths do not have to actively filter their relationships. Their authentic presence does the filtering automatically. I spent considerable time studying what I call the frequency phenomenon. I observed that integrated empaths operate at what I termed high vibration authenticity, a psychological state that naturally repels deceptive individuals while attracting conscious ones. I documented how this happened automatically. Manipulative people would feel inexplicably uncomfortable around integrated empaths. They could not explain why, but something about these individuals made their usual tactics feel transparent and ineffective. Meanwhile, emotionally healthy people felt energized and inspired by these empaths' presence. I realized this was not mystical, it was psychological. Integrated empaths had become so comfortable with truth that falsehood became impossible to maintain around them. They created what I called authenticity fields, environments where pretense naturally dissolved. I observed them becoming what I called selectively empathetic, still deeply caring, but strategically protective of where that care flowed. They had learned that their empathy was not something to be spilled everywhere. It was sacred. It had to be earned. This selective empathy was not coldness. I understood it as psychological maturity. These empaths had learned to distinguish between people genuinely struggling and people addicted to struggle. They could sense the difference between someone seeking healing and someone seeking enablement. The most disturbing part was how these transformed empaths' presence affected others. People who had once walked all over them suddenly felt nervous around them. They could not explain why. These empaths were not aggressive or cruel, but everyone sensed something had fundamentally changed. I documented how manipulative individuals would often attempt regression testing with transformed empaths, trying to pull them back into old patterns through guilt or shame. When these tactics failed, the manipulators often became frustrated, revealing their true nature. But the integrated empaths remained unmoved by these attempts. They had developed emotional immunity, the ability to witness manipulation without being affected. They could see the behavior, understand its purpose, and choose not to engage. I identified what I called the predator's instinct. Manipulative people can sense when their usual tactics will not work. They avoid integrated empaths like vampires avoid sunlight. I wrote, the awakened empath does not need to announce their power. Others can feel it in their bones. These empath transformations did not happen in isolation. I documented how their changes affected every system they had been part of. Family dynamics collapsed, not because these individuals destroyed them, but because they stopped enabling dysfunction. I documented several cases where integrated empaths' family members accused them of changing or becoming cold. In reality, these empaths had simply stopped enabling dysfunction. They were no longer willing to absorb others' emotional chaos. I observed that some family members eventually grew in response to the empath's boundaries. Others chose distance rather than self-examination. But in every case, the integrated empath remained centered about their choices. I observed something I called the empath's mirror effect. These transformed individuals did not have to actively confront people's dysfunction anymore. Their mere presence reflected issues back with uncomfortable clarity. Manipulators could not stand to be around them. They felt exposed, seen through, unable to operate their usual psychological games. This mirror effect was not something these empaths did consciously. I realized it was a natural result of their integrated authenticity. When someone has stopped hiding from themselves, they create a psychological environment where others cannot hide either. One striking case involved a man I called Patient T, who worked in a corporate environment. After his integration, His mere presence in meetings changed how people behaved. Colleagues stopped backstabbing and manipulation when he was around, not because he confronted them, but because their behavior felt too transparent to continue. I noted that patient T did not become judgmental. He simply embodied integrated awareness, seeing everything clearly without needing to fix it. This quality created safety for authentic people while making inauthentic behavior impossible to sustain. Meanwhile, authentic people felt safe with these empaths for the first time. My research showed that awakened empaths become living truth detectors, not through judgment, but through presence. I spent years studying this phenomenon and developed what I called the authenticity resonance theory. People naturally align with a dominant psychological frequency in any environment. When an integrated empath enters a space, their authentic presence becomes the dominant frequency. This creates spontaneous healing environments. People who have been hiding suddenly feel permission to be authentic. The integrated empath does not have to do anything. Their presence alone facilitates healing. The most disturbing discovery came when I introduced these transformed patients to others in my practice. Within minutes, they could identify core psychological wounds and the exact type of therapy needed. I realized these empaths' diagnostic accuracy surpassed my own decades of training. I began conducting intuitive assessment experiments. I would have integrated empaths to observe new patients briefly, then compare their insights to my professional evaluations. The empath's accuracy was almost supernatural. They could identify childhood trauma patterns, attachment styles, and core wounds with startling precision. I realized these individuals had developed psychological X-ray vision, but I discovered something even more remarkable. These empaths could not only diagnose psychological patterns, they could predict behavior with uncanny accuracy. They would tell me exactly how a person would respond to certain therapeutic approaches, which defense mechanisms would emerge under stress, and what kinds of relationships each individual would attract. I began testing this predictive ability systematically. I would have empaths observe patients for just minutes, then make predictions about their psychological development. Over 85% of their predictions proved accurate over the following months and years. I realized I was documenting something that challenged the entire field of psychology. These empaths had developed, through survival necessity, diagnostic and predictive abilities that exceeded formal psychological training. They had become what I called natural psychological scientists. I began to understand that every empath potentially carries this level of insight. The difference was that integrated empaths had learned to trust their perceptions completely. This created an ethical dilemma that haunted me for years. If empaths could develop this level of psychological insight naturally through trauma and integration, what did that mean for the future of psychology itself? I realized I was witnessing the emergence of natural psychologists, individuals whose experiences had forced them to develop therapeutic level insights. These empaths could read people's patterns and facilitate healing with remarkable skill. But I also recognized the potential dangers An empath with this level of insight could easily manipulate others if they chose. They could identify vulnerabilities and exploit them with precision. The ethical implications kept me awake at night. I began seeing empathic sensitivity not as a disorder to be cured, but as a psychological capability to be properly understood and protected. I also recognized something concerning. In the wrong circumstances, these abilities could be devastating. An empath who integrated their shadow without proper ethical grounding could become extremely manipulative. I spent months developing the ethical integration framework. I found that authentic shadow integration naturally includes ethical expansion. When empaths truly integrate their shadow, they do not become cruel. They become more compassionate. This happened because integration forced these individuals to face their own capacity for darkness. They confronted their ability to manipulate and their potential for cruelty. But rather than embracing these aspects, they chose to transmute them into protective strength. I documented how integrated empaths developed fierce compassion, the ability to be ruthlessly kind. They would refuse to enable destructive behavior while maintaining love for the person. They learned to separate the individual from their actions. I developed conscious integration protocols, guided processes that could help empaths integrate safely and ethically. My protocols focused on awareness, acceptance, and application. First, empaths needed awareness of their suppressed shadow aspects, then acceptance of these as natural parts of wholeness, and finally, learning to apply integrated power for healing rather than harm. I tested these protocols with dozens of patients over several years. The results were remarkable. Empaths who underwent conscious integration developed the same psychological immunity as those forced into transformation through trauma, but without the devastating betrayal trigger. I realized shadow integration did not have to wait for ultimate betrayal. It could be achieved through conscious choice and guided process. This meant empaths could reclaim their power before they were broken. My conscious integration method proved so effective that I began what I called the Zurich Empathic Integration Study, a comprehensive research project tracking empaths through conscious transformation over multiple years. The results revolutionized my understanding of human potential. Conscious integration not only prevented the devastating trauma that usually triggered empath awakening, it actually produced more stable and sustainable transformations. Empaths who chose their integration journey maintained better relationships, experienced less psychological turbulence, and developed more balanced access to their abilities. I documented how these consciously integrated empaths became what I termed evolutionary bridges, individuals who could help other empaths navigate their own transformation without waiting for crisis to force the process. My final notes on these cases reveal something beautiful. These individuals lived the rest of their lives as what I described as balanced warriors. People capable of incredible gentleness with those who earned it and implacable strength against those who threatened it. I documented how these balanced warriors moved through the world with conscious sovereignty. They made decisions based on their values rather than others' expectations. They chose relationships that nourished rather than drained them. Most importantly, they maintained open-hearted boundaries. They could remain emotionally available to authentic connection while being unavailable to manipulation. They had learned to love without losing themselves. I studied these transformed individuals for decades. What I found was remarkable. Not a single integrated empath ever reverted to old patterns of unconscious absorption. The transformation was permanent. These individuals continued evolving throughout their lives. Their shadow integration became a foundation for continued psychological development. They became lifetime learners of consciousness. I noted that integrated empaths often became mentors to other sensitive individuals, creating consciousness networks, communities of psychologically mature individuals, supporting each other's continued evolution. They became templates for what I believed was humanity's next evolutionary step. People who could feel everything without being destroyed by it, see everything without becoming cynical, and love deeply without losing themselves. My last observation about these transformed empaths, written near the end of my career, they prove that the empath's journey is not from sensitivity to numbness, but from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. They became not less empathetic, but perfectly empathetic. Now, if you are an empath, recognizing yourself in this research, understand that you are facing what I called the most important choice in human psychological development. You can wait for life to force this transformation upon you through ultimate betrayal, or you can begin conscious integration now. My research revealed that most empaths, when pushed to their breaking point, choose integration naturally. They do not become cruel. They become precise. They do not lose their hearts. They gain backbones. The transformed empath becomes what I called love with boundaries. Someone who can care deeply while protecting themselves absolutely. My research revealed this transformation did not have to wait for rock bottom. Through my conscious integration protocols, empaths could begin this journey while they still had their strength and hope intact. Here is how to recognize if you are ready for conscious transformation. Do you find yourself constantly absorbing others' emotions to the point where you cannot distinguish your feelings from theirs? Do you explain away red flags to maintain peace even when your intuition is screaming warnings? Do you apologize for your needs while meeting everyone else's demands without question? Do you feel drained after social interactions, especially with certain people who seem to leave you feeling depleted and confused? Do you find yourself making excuses for others' bad behavior while being hypercritical of your own mistakes? Do you struggle to say no even when saying yes feels like betraying yourself? These are not character flaws, and they are not signs of weakness. They are indicators that you possess the advanced emotional processing capabilities I identified, but you have not learned to direct them consciously yet. You are operating from what I called unconscious empathy, feeling everything but choosing nothing. I developed exercises to help empaths strengthen their perceptual trust. The first was intuition journaling, writing down gut feelings about people and situations. Then tracking accuracy over time. I found that empaths who did this for 30 days began trusting their perceptions at a much deeper level. The second exercise was boundary experimentation, starting with small boundaries and noticing how people respond. I observed that empaths were often shocked by how rarely people respected their boundaries, but also noted that healthy people actually preferred empaths with limits. The third exercise was shadow dialogue, consciously connecting with suppressed aspects of themselves. I guided empaths through conversations with their shadow selves, helping them understand that their suppressed anger was information, their denied power was protection, and their silenced intuition was wisdom.